Maggie Farrar is an international thought leader in the field of education. Based in the United Kingdom, she has extensive experience in the field of building the capacity of schools and their communities to transform the lives of children and close the gaps in student achievement. Maggie visited Australia in May 2016 for a series of workshops organised by the Queensland Education Leadership Institute. This interview was recorded by Catholic Education Services Cairns as part of a series of interviews to promote parent understanding of the role of the contemporary Catholic school.
I mean, there is no doubt that schools are very busy places. Teachers work hard and principals work hard. But we also know that the demands from young people in terms of the curriculum, the range of needs that schools have got to support, and the need for schools to be continuously improving. Schools just can't do that on their own. Leaders and teachers need to be in the game of constantly learning and constantly improving. And so when schools get together to collaborate, it needn't be looked at as, well, this is additional to what I already do, but actually it's helping me to do my job even better. And we know, for example, from research that teachers generally improve over the first 3 years of their teaching career. And after that, they tend to plateau. They may be in the same school or at least in the system for 25 or 30 years. So we need to find ways in which improving and learning from each other as teachers and as principals is just a natural part of how we work. And therefore working in clusters and collaborating gives teachers the chance to work with other colleagues, jointly to work together on something that they want to improve together, experiment, innovate, trial things in their classroom, even watch each other and observe each other teach, and then come back and look at what the impact has been. And we know that one of the things that motivates people is the opportunity to do great work together, which has an impact. Teachers can't do that on their own. They can't collaborate with themselves. But the focus has always got to be greater improvement and greater impact. So I'm pretty convinced from everything that I see across the world that schools working together in clusters is definitely the way forward. We hear the phrase, the outward-facing school, being used a lot. And at its most simplest, it is exactly what it says. Schools not only looking inward in terms of improvement, but also looking outward. Not least because if schools are too inward focused, they can easily lose the sense of a benchmark in terms of how good they are. And certainly in England, we've suffered from schools beginning to coast, simply because they have focused inward so much. It's almost become a self-reinforcing concept in terms of how good they are. I mean, one could say they could become deluded unless they are outward-facing. We also know that for the children, being able to engage in a rich curriculum, be it an extracurricular activity or something within the school curriculum, if the schools are outward-facing, they're much more able to connect with other schools to, say, offer some great drama or some great music, or offer a language that they might not normally be able to offer as a single standalone school. We have a phrase in England, we say the era of the standalone school is over. And it is over. And it's really about creating community, both between the school and its community, and between the school and other schools. And when you start to do that, there are so many communities of practice that can come together, whether it's a group of young initial teachers who come together across schools to learn from each other, whether it's a group of teachers who are heading up to retirement. We talk about that as building wisdom banks of teachers who've got such a lot to share, but often it's locked up in their own classroom or their own school. And then working collaboratively and collegially with parents and families who are the co-constructors of the learning experience with their children. So being outward-facing is just as important as being inward-facing, and schools getting that balance is really important for continuous improvement. If you've read my writing and some of the work that I've been doing, you'll have heard me talk about schools being courageous and honest, and in fact being more vulnerable and confronting what I call the brutal facts. And this is really about schools being courageous enough to talk about the undiscussables. Every school has got an area of their practice where it's not going well, whether it's underperforming teachers, whether it's particular groups of children who are underperforming, whether it's engagement with families that's not as strong as they would like it to be. But every school has got a strength and every school has got an area of development. And therefore being able as schools to come together and share with each other what are these undiscussables that we've really not been able to tackle up to now, and inviting other principals in to look at that area of practice and say, look, just give me another perspective on this. Tell me what you see going on. Then let's talk together about how we might improve it. And very often those areas that are challenging are shared between more than one school. They're shared across schools. So schools coming together to look at how they might tackle them is one of the best ways of improving schools that I know. And in England, we've done a lot of work on peer-to-peer review, where leaders review leaders' practice, teachers review teachers' practice. Very focused on outcomes, very focused on impact, and focused on the fact that one of the best gifts we can give to each other is really strong, robust, evidence-based professional challenge. That's part of being professionally generous. So of course, one of the natural extensions of this, if you look at what a really mature, self-improving school system might look like, is that principals, schools and teachers begin to feel jointly responsible for each other's outcomes. So you hear in schools the language shifting from my children and my school to our children and our school. Often in a locality where the families live in a locality and the schools begin to see themselves as responsible for all children within that locality. Now, of course, it's challenging. It means the schools being very open and sharing their data together. It means clusters of schools coming together with their families and saying, what is it we really want for children growing up in this area? What would be the measures in this community of a truly great school system? And involving the families and the children in that discussion. What these schools do is that then they publish those measures, they publish what it is they want to achieve, they hold themselves and each other, and indeed the families and the children, for achieving those outcomes together. I'm firmly convinced that this is the way that the school system is going, and I think it's the way that the school system needs to go. It balances support and challenge equally. Because if we're jointly accountable for each other's outcomes, it means that we are clear about what the best parts of all our schools are. We've got a great English teacher here, great science teacher here, somebody who's terrific with children with special needs over here. We know where all our challenges are as a community of schools, and we have both the will and the capability to move those best resources to where they're most needed. That's when you see a self-improving school system in action, but it's very challenging. It means me going to one principal and saying, I've got a real problem in maths. My head of maths has gone off sick. I've got some really challenging kids in those classes. My teachers are really struggling. Please, can I have your head of maths for a day a week for 3 months? If you've come together as a collaborative with a memorandum of understanding that says we are all equally responsible for each other's outcomes, the response from that principal to that request is they'll be with you this afternoon. It's a big ask, but we see it happening. We've got a long history in England of schools coming together in different forms of collaboration, and over the years we've had different policy initiatives. So we've got a mixture in England of networks of schools, clusters of schools, alliances of schools, federations of schools, chains of schools, but they're all working to do the same thing, which is to work better together to achieve better outcomes. So as a result of this history, I think we've got a pretty good idea about what makes an effective cluster. Size matters. Anything above about 8, it gets too big, because you need to create that sense of intimacy and trust within which you can create the sort of supporting and challenging culture that I've been talking about. We find the best clusters are those that are very diverse. So for example, you don't want a cluster made up of all outstanding schools, nor do you want a cluster made up of all schools that are in challenging circumstances. You want a diversity of schools in the cluster, because all schools have strengths and some weaknesses, but you do need a diversity of schools in the cluster. That seems to be the engine that drives improvement. We also find that something very powerful happens when a primary school peer reviews a secondary school, and a secondary school peer reviews a primary school, or indeed, as I've seen in one instance, an early years preschool kindy setting peer reviewing a secondary school. It's very powerful because you've got professionals coming in, bringing a completely different set of eyes, and they will see things in your school that you haven't seen, and vice versa. So I would say the more diverse the cluster, the better. However, there is a challenge in that clusters can become just as inward looking as schools can. So one of the things we need to ward against is clusters operating as isolated units. So we need to build at the same time cluster to cluster review and cluster to cluster relationships. Otherwise, clusters can become complacent, they can become inward looking, and that's just as dangerous as a school becoming inward looking and complacent. Obviously, the relationship with parents and with families is critical to any form of collaboration. I think the first thing is that the families, the parents need to understand why a collaborative approach to educating their child is better than a single institution. And this can take some time because the parents often feel very strongly about my school, my principal, my child's teacher. And when they find out that actually your child's teacher is working in another school down the road for a day a week and you didn't want your child to go to that school, immediately you're worried that actually your child's education might suffer as a result. In fact, that doesn't happen. All the research says that where a teacher or a principal supports another school, not only does the school that's been supported, their results improve faster than the national average, but the school that's providing the support, their results start to improve faster than the national average. So where it's done well, it's a win-win. But it takes a while for the parents to really get that, because it seems a bit counterintuitive. The other then is obviously the fact that when a school becomes better at collaborating with other schools and understands the whole principle of co-creation in terms of school improvement, their relationships with their own families and communities also start to become better, in that really the families and the community are part of this endeavour. The geography, the town, the city is part of this whole endeavour. So where it's done well, it automatically builds better and more sustainable relationships with families and with parents. And one of the things that we found is that where a group of schools has prioritised employing local families, employing parents, grandmothers, grandfathers, aunties in that collaboration, that is an investment in the economic well-being of the family, and then the children also benefit. So there's lots of ways in which collaboration can provide multiple opportunities for families, not only to be more engaged in the school, but to also develop their own skills through the schools and on occasion be employed by them as well. There's just a greater number of schools that are able to do this and offer these opportunities. So sustaining this sort of cultural change we're talking about has to be addressed and has to be given really high priority. I mean, I often say to principals and teachers, we are just passing through. The community own the school. The families own the school. The children in our schools are the next generation of leaders. Where are the next generation of teachers going to come from? Where are the next generation of leaders to lead these schools going to come from, if not from these schools themselves? So that's a really important part of the purpose behind the collaboration. So it's really important that the work behind building the clusters of schools doesn't stay at the level of the principals. Unless the principals engage everybody in that community, in building the collaboration, in building the cluster, but also having a role to play in it. If I was being blunt, I'd say in some clusters that I've worked with, when I talk to the teachers, they say, oh, it's the principal's coffee club. We don't know what goes on. They meet in their offices and talk about this cluster we're all meant to be part of, but we don't know what goes on. So it's really important that the principals very quickly let go and allow as many people as possible in their own school community to be part of this wider community. But there are a number of things that will hold us back and that will stop us being sustainable. And I think it's really about all other parts of the system lining up with this notion of cluster-based school development and school improvement. So the accountability system and any inspection and review system has got to line up. If schools are held accountable as individual institutions, or reviewed as individual institutions, or inspected as individual institutions, self-interest will always come first. If parents apply rather than to a federation or a cluster of schools, but to an individual school, then self-interest will always come to the fore. How is the money allocated? If money is always allocated directly to schools, and then how much money do we want to put into the central pot, and we all plead poverty, self-interest will always come first. So all of the other parts of the system have got to line up with the fact that we are talking about, we call it in England, connected autonomy. Schools are autonomous, but they have to be connected, and everything else has got to line up around that.